Unlike the Halloween franchise, there's been no shortage of Evil Dead video games over the years, even going back as far as the early PlayStation days, and with 2 released on the PS2, Fistful of Boomstick and Regeneration, I had a lot of fun with this one back in the day, kicking the little Ted Raimi character around. There was the asymmetrical online-style Evil Dead game released a few years ago, and though I did have some fun with it, most particularly because you could actually play as a variety of characters from the movie and TV show, including my boy Scotty. I couldn't believe I could play an Evil Dead video game as Scotty. Hey, remember, before Ash stepped up to the plate, it was Scotty holding it down in the cabin. He deserves a little respect too. He just didn't make it to the second movie. Anyway, recently, Retrorealms released a double horror experience in a throwback platformer style, reminiscent to many games from the bygone but not forgotten Super Nintendo and Sega era, creating a Halloween game where you get to play as Michael Myers, slashing your way through insane asylums and in Haddonfield. I reviewed this game already. I'll put a link to that video down below, but side by side, there was also an Ash vs. Evil Dead game, so you know I had to get in on this one too. Specifically, this is based off of the TV series of the same name, sadly cut short after 3 seasons, but it was an incredibly hyper-violent, hilarious, and blood-soaked ride while it was airing.
30 years ago, my friends and I spent the night at a cabin. We found the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, evil. I was the only one to escape, but now the evil has found me.
It takes place 30 years after the original Evil Dead trilogy, picking up with Ash as an old man, having to once again face down a horde of deadite monsters and demons. I think if you just wanted to play this as a side-scrolling adventure where you chop down monsters, you don't need to know anything about the show to be able to enjoy it, really. But if you have watched the show, you're going to get a lot more out of it, catching various references of locations, characters, and the boss battles. And obviously, just knowing who Ash is and why the hell he has a chainsaw attached to his arm, that helps. If you get both of these games together, you can play as Michael Myers in this world too if you want to, as well as play with Laurie Strode from the Halloween franchise or Kelly from Ash vs. Evil Dead. And like before, whether you enjoy this game or not is going to depend on your enjoyment of the novelty of having a side-scrolling Evil Dead game, or if you even like side-scrollers and platformers to begin with. But for an old man like me that loves the Evil Dead franchise, this is my jam. Essentially, the mechanics work the same as the Halloween game. You walk, jump, dash, and have short-range and long-range attacks. For the melee, of course, it's Ash's trusty chainsaw, and you'll be swinging this thing around a lot. However, I think they made a massive misstep here. What do you think the long-range attack would be? Wouldn't it have to be the shotgun? I'm sorry, the boomstick?
This is my boomstick!
But no, it's other things like collecting the Kandarian daggers to throw, which is fine, but come on, I want to use the boomstick. You already have to collect ammo in order to use the long-range attacks, and you have to gather that ammo throughout the course of the level, so why couldn't the ammo just be shells for the shotgun? It seems like a pretty silly oversight to not have this be your long-range attack. Now, you can use the shotgun, but you have to hold down the attack button for it to charge up, and then he fires the gun. But the problem is that as the game gets going, you so rarely are in a position where you can actually take the time to charge up the weapon and fire accurately. After stage 2, there's so many enemies and so many constant jumps and hurdles to go through that you barely get a moment to stand still in order to charge your shotgun. And why are you charging a shotgun to begin with? Shouldn't you just have to cock it? I really wanted to use it more, but you don't really get much of a chance to. Maybe it's more of a pet peeve than anything else. I guess it's not really a big deal, but I really wanted to shoot some things. Anyway, I'm going to talk about the stages one by one, so if you don't want to be spoiled or see too far into the game, feel free to stop the video whenever you would like. We'll start with stage 1, and like I said, this does specifically follow the events from the TV show and not the movies, so we are starting out in the trailer park where Ash is living in the beginning of the show. And it's detailed pretty correctly. They even have Eli in the corner. And just like the Halloween game, our major enemy is the Overlord. It's this demonic being that shows up, steals the Necronomicon from Ash, and begins unleashing hordes of evil onto the world. So Ash sets off to take them down and retrieve the book. Simple enough. Mostly all of your enemies here are deadites, and you just tear your way through them. Some of them have long-range attacks, some of them charge at you. There's a little bit of a variety here. And you do get the same eyeball that transforms everything into the Nightmare Realm, which you'll need to switch back and forth to on occasion in order to access different areas. The health items are, of course, the Pink Fuck drink, which is an iconic healthy beverage from the show that's filled with ketamine. I'll be honest, I was feeling really confident when I started this game up. The trailer park level was a breeze to get through, and I thought maybe it's because I played all the way through the Halloween game that I just got used to the mechanics and got good at this. Even when I made it to the first boss fight, which is Vivian as a Deadite, Ash's neighbor from the first episode, I literally beat her on the first try. The first boss fight in the Halloween game took me several tries to get through, but here it just felt like instinct. Just dodge, slash, dodge, and slash. The second stage was my favorite because it takes place in the woods, which leads us to the original Evil Dead cabin. My only disappointment is that the cabin itself is only reserved for the boss fight at the end, and really the entire stage is just going through the woods. But even so, this part was a lot of fun, and again, I was breezing through it. I started thinking to myself, wow, this game is way easier than the last one. Little did I know, this feeling was simply leading me into a false sense of security before it goes to literal hell. But before we get there, the boss fight in this stage is Ruby. But really, you're just fighting her demonic health spawn. And once again, it's a pretty easy boss fight. It took me 3 or 4 tries overall, but this one is just about dodging at the right time and slashing at a bunch of enemies. It's fun, but not that challenging. But then, in Stage 3 is where the difficulty begins to ramp up. Taking place in Elk Grove, Ash's hometown, where the majority of Season 2 takes place, you have way more platform jumps to make here, slime that's on half of them that makes you fall off as you're trying to walk forward, fire that rises up on occasion, most of the enemies are spitting green whatever shit out of their mouths, and this is more about what I was talking about, not being able to charge up your shotgun because you have to constantly be moving. Trying not to get hit is rough, but this isn't even half of it. When it comes to Stage 4 and 5, it gets way worse. But first, you have to fight Elagos. Now, I was so stoked to see Elagos in this game because I think he's the coolest demon from the entire series, maybe from the entire franchise. I love his design. He reminds me of something out of a Resident Evil game. He's pretty tough compared to the first 2 bosses and constantly teleports around the room. He shoots this black sphere of energy, which is really hard to avoid, especially when you only have a few platforms to choose from. The only trick I found here is that if you do try to slash him a few times, he disappears, but he will eventually stop to laugh at you. And as he's doing that, you're able to get a few shots in. This is a test of patience to get the hits in, along with needing to constantly be jumping around the room. Your thumbs are going to be in pain. And don't get too cocky because as you get his life down, he goes into another room and you have to follow him in there with a completely different layout and figure out new ways to attack and dodge. And there's no extra save for the second part of the fight. You gotta do both parts all in the same try. Stage 4 is a ridiculous pain in the ass, taking place in the mental asylum, and yes, you do get to see Puppet Ash. But here the massive levels of frustration begin to brew because you have to make near perfect jumps in order to avoid the spikes, slug monsters on platforms, the constant flowing wind pushing you off track. Meanwhile, you still have enemies spitting projectiles and running at you all the time. You need to do these wall jumps, you need to stay in constant movement, or you'll just fall into oblivion. Oh yeah, and some enemies explode. So right when you're in the thick of a fight, you gotta remember to run away or else you'll be damaged by the explosion. It's like the first 2 stages were fun and whimsical and reminded you of Evil Dead, and now stage 3 and 4 are like, fuck you. Your boss fight here is Evil Ash. You know, between the movies and TV show, there's been 3 different Evil Ashes, not including when Ash was a Deadite for a while as well. But I think this is meant to be the Season 3 Evil Ash, but who knows? It's just an Evil Ash. He wasn't too difficult, harder than the first 2 bosses, but I thought he was easier than Elagos. Stage 5 is the Overlord's Castle, and I'm about to show you the most frustrating, rage-inducing, evil thing you've ever seen in a platformer. You get to this part where you have to jump and clutch the wall and then make a perfect landing to a platform that breaks open after 2 seconds, all while trying to avoid these flying eyeballs that are constantly swimming across the screen that have no pattern whatsoever. Some of them will be high, some of them will be low, so it's just a matter of luck that you're able to make the jump at the right point in between two of the eyeball monsters not being in your way. Then you get to another platform, you have to jump to another wall, and then you have to make it through 3 more breakaway platforms, avoiding the spikes on the walls, all while the eyeballs are flying around in random patterns that you can't predict. And if you fail and die, you have to start the entire stage over again, trying to make your way against the enemies on the way there so that you have enough life to spare getting through this platforming section. But it gets even worse. If you actually manage to make it to the end, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but each stage has 2 parts, and there's only ever a boss on the second part of the stage. So when I got to the end here, I put the controller down, thinking I had made it. But then the Delta car comes alive, and you actually have to fight it like a boss. And it doesn't just take a few hits. It's literally this unannounced boss fight that you have to avoid getting run over, have to avoid dodging the tires it throws at you, and you have to hit it multiple times. And if you die here against the car, guess what? You go all the way back to the start of the level, which means you have to get through the enemies again, you have to get through the platforming nightmare section again, all so that you can get a chance just to fight the car again, and the other boss fights, you just start out at the boss fight, so you can memorize the patterns a little bit better. But this part is completely different. You have to redo the entire level. You have to continuously shift your focus so that by the time you get back to the car, it's easy to forget everything that the car can do. This is a grade A pain in the ass, but I did eventually do it. And the final stage, just as annoying with its platforms, most of them moving to knock you off, so you have to constantly be pressing forward on some and backwards on others. There's spikes everywhere, but it is somewhat easier than the first part. But here, I gotta be honest with you guys, I did make it to the final boss of the game to fight the Overlord, but although I was able to beat the Halloween game, I have not completed this one. But let me show you why. So just like the Halloween game, the final boss fight is really 2 final bosses back to back. You have to beat them both on the same life bar as well, basically meaning that you can't get hit even once on the first boss, or it's not even worth it to try to fight the second. The first one is Kandar the Destroyer, the final kaiju monster seen at the end of Season 3. And it is really cool to see this creature in the game. I guess ultimately, if you memorize its attack patterns, it is possible to get through him without getting hit, but it's so easy to fuck up. If you're not perfectly in sync with his movements, you're bound to get hit. And if you can get through him, then you fight the giant-sized version of the Overlord. And I get the idea, you have to attack his eyeballs, but the platforms that you're forced to be on only move up and down, so you have to wait for them to be in the exact right spot to attack. And if you stay on one too long, you go to the bottom of the screen and just die. So you're forced to keep having to jump back and forth to stay not at the bottom of the screen, but at the same time, he also spits out this black orb that's similar to Elagos, but you have nowhere to go. It follows you so closely, and you only have a limited amount of movement options, it's no doubt going to hit you a few times. I don't know what I'm supposed to do to avoid it. I got familiar enough with this fight to get the strategy for going after the eyes, but between the black orb that's constantly hitting me, falling to the bottom of the screen, I just don't have enough life to get the job done. I try getting through Kandar in order to have all of my life by the time I get there, but inevitably I get hit at least once or twice by him. So fighting Kandar and then fighting the Overlord over and over, I really wanted to beat this game for both my own stubborn frustration to finish it, but also to give you guys a full conclusive review. But I reached a point where I realized that I would rather be sitting and eating some tacos on my couch while watching a horror movie than pulling out my hair trying to complete this insanity any longer. I spent like an hour trying to do it, and ultimately I gave up. I'll go back to it sometime, but as of right now, unfortunately, I do have to admit defeat, but at least I made it to the end. A false sense of security is how I would describe this whole game. The first few levels feel so easy and fun, and then it quickly descends into madness. It's hard, or maybe I just suck, I don't know. But the Halloween game was also hard, and I did manage to beat it in a day. This one, though, I just couldn't. Although the mechanics are the same on this game and the Halloween one, I do like how both games do feel very different, and they take a lot of inspiration from their respective properties. This is definitely worth checking out if you're a fan of the show and a fan of 2D platformers, but make sure you have a bottle of ibuprofen and a stress ball nearby because this game will no doubt piss you off to no end. Ultimately, even though it's super frustrating, as an Evil Dead fan, I had fun with it, and I'd recommend it for that reason. If you guys have played the Ash vs. Evil Dead Retro Realm game, let me know what you think about it down below. If you also have played it, have you played the Halloween game as well that's attached to it? And if they made a few more of these, I wouldn't be too upset. It'd be pretty cool to have one as Jason Voorhees or Freddy Krueger or whoever they can come up with. If anything, I like different variety when it comes to these games because a lot of the horror games have all been the same, so I like throwing it back a little bit old school and giving us something different. Let me know what you guys think down below. Please leave your thoughts, comments, and opinions. Please like the video to help it out in the algorithm. Other than that, guys, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time.
Let's go.